Okay, we're ready.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Lee Fisher. I'm the Dean of Cleveland Marshall College of Law. And almost every week, we have a different forum on an issue that is very relevant to what's happening in the world today. And this may be the most relevant one that we've done in a long time, because in 1 week, we will have a presidential election that many believe will be the most important election in our lifetimes. Having been through many presidential elections, both as an observer and in some cases even as a participant for one of the candidates, I've never been in an election season where everybody didn't think it was the most important election in their lives up to that point. So some people may say, well, they say that all the time. I can honestly say in my lifetime, this is the most important, regardless of who you're for, regardless of your ideology. And why is that? Because I don't think America has ever been more divided than it is now. And there have never been more threats to our democracy and our election system than ever before. And those are the issues that we're going to focus on today from 3 experts, all of whom have a long time affiliation with our great law school. 2 of them are alumni from our law school, and 1 is a longtime distinguished professor with our law school. We're going to be hearing today from Professor Emeritus Candace Hoke, who is the co-founder of our Center for Cybersecurity and Privacy Protection, and is an internationally known expert on election integrity. And we couldn't be happier that she's taking time out of her busy schedule to join us. We're also joined today by 2 of our very distinguished recent alumni. Elizabeth Bonham, graduate of 2015, has already served on a number of panels that we've done in the past on a wide variety of issues. She's with the Ohio ACLU just earlier this week. In fact, yesterday, she was on a panel that I moderated concerning the law and protests and free speech. And then we also have Kayla Griffin, who's also been a panelist with us before. And she is an expert in her own right, a graduate, I think, in 2014, a graduate on elections, and particularly an expert on this particular election coming up and the importance of voting and the voting system. What we're going to do today, and Amy Miller knows the order, and I'm going to make sure I got this right. I think we're going to go with Professor Candace Hoke first. Then I believe, tell me if I'm right, we're going to go to Elizabeth Bonham second. Is that right?
We're going to go to Kayla second, and then we'll end with Elizabeth.
I had a 50% chance there, and I blew it. Okay. Kayla Griffin will go second, and Elizabeth Bonham will go third. Each of them will talk for approximately 10 minutes, but I'm not going to keep them exactly on my stopwatch. If they want to go a little over, that's fine. And then we're going to open it up to questions from me and from all of you. So without further ado, let's go first to Professor Emeritus Candace Hoke.
Hi there. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. Are we able to see the screen?
Yes, we can. We can see the screen and we can see you.
Oh, that sounds great. Seeing the screen, not me. Good to see you, Lee, Elizabeth, and Kayla. My part in this program today is not a happy one. I am basically the bad news. So I could say more positive things, but I am assigned the bad news. So my area is threats to U.S. election integrity in 2020, focusing on election technologies. So we are, as probably the entire audience knows, we have many types of threats. Why and how did we obtain these this set of threats? It's basically because in the wake of the Florida 2000 election, the U.S. Congress was pushed to modernize election technologies. And they were persuaded that computers used in various ways in the election system would eliminate human bias and would essentially turn our elections into a sort of self-running, completely neutral and accurate technology versus what we had been using, which had all sorts of vulnerabilities, it was thought, to humans twisting or adapting the election outcomes to their preferences. Now, I have to mention that it's a sad situation because there were some truly noble aspirations behind these reforms, but the reform process in Congress was beset with a great deal of misinformation and disinformation about the security of the technologies that could be adapted. There was a tremendous amount of ignorance in Congress and among congressional staffs that were considering these areas for reform about computers and the internet. There were also some what I would consider to be misplaced federalism and state rights arguments. So for instance, should we have national standards for accuracy in voting technologies? Is that something we should leave to states versus have a national commitment that the election technology would be reliable and accurate? As a federalism scholar and used to a former teacher of federalism, I thought there should have been no question politically or constitutionally about that. There was political inertia about repeatedly about improving the early mistakes. And then we might even say when we move into post 2016, there may have been some more sinister opportunism at the political level for why we did not improve our security in our elections. So I'm supposed to be speaking of vulnerabilities and threats to our elections. It's a huge topic, of course, and we have so much to be discussing today. So I'm just going to hit some highlights. We proved that our election technologies, particularly in our voting systems, were beset with fundamental vulnerabilities that allowed the elections to be essentially seized, disrupted, and manipulated as far as the election results. In 2007, we could have at that point started investing in much better systems and in secure systems that would not allow those kinds of techniques to be used to disrupt our elections. Unfortunately, we did not. I do want to mention that CSU Law was very much involved in these definitive studies. There were two, one out of California, one from the Ohio Secretary of State's office. We participated in both, and our law students participated in both. And they are considered widely to be the definitive studies. The record of vulnerabilities was politically ignored at the federal level until 2016, when we had quite clear documentation, which has also then been repeated and deepened in documents such as the Mueller report and in the US Senate Intelligence Committee report earlier this year. We know that the excuse me, the incursions into our election systems are ongoing right now. So what's the threat environment, as we say in security? Well, we have external threats. We know that we have nation states such as Russia, China, North Korea. We have criminal syndicates who, for money, who could be actually bought to disrupt elections for certain ends because of, there could be economic actors involved. We also have what we call non-state adversaries, ISIS and Taliban. You may be surprised that both of these entities have developed quite significant cybersecurity attack teams. Very different from 2016. We have many more foreign adversaries involved. Domestic, we have what I consider to be unethical partisans, or those who only watch scoreboards, who wins, care only about who wins and not about the process and the fairness. We may have economically interested entities that want to have, for instance, government contracts. We could have candidates or issue proponents who try to get involved in our elections to try to steer outcomes. In other words, those who focus here are often focused on outcomes over process and view the end to justify the means. I would also mention, however, excuse me, that particularly with regard to some of our foreign adversaries, just humiliating the United States is an outcome that they would seek. Maybe not changing results, but throwing our election process into significant doubt or crashing systems so that they can't function, be they the voter registration system for checking voters in or the tabulation systems that could raise trust issues. So as far as tools and targets, how am I doing on time, Amy? I turned off my phone.
You're doing fine so far. You've got probably, yeah, I mean, you're fine. You probably about 5 minutes more, maybe?
Okay, I think I can wrap up in maybe 3. So as far as tools, targets and vectors, the easiest vector is to use the internet, which is one of the reasons why, excuse me, election security subject matter experts have been urging assessments of network architecture because many of the election offices have been hooked into their county internet systems. And so there is a complete access into election technologies through county systems. That's true nationwide. Not universally nationwide, but this is a problem in many, many states. For instance, in Florida, just to show you the sadness of the situation, when I attended Secretary of State's election security meeting held for election officials, the officer in charge said that they have network architecture on the list to address and correct in every Florida county by 2022. Doesn't that give you great comfort for 2020? Again, another battleground state. So we have remote access via the internet. We have physical access via what we in security refer to as the insider threat. And insider threat are those who have legitimate access, but misuse it. It could be because they are just tired, which we've targeted, or excuse me, we've assessed, and we know that, for instance, in banks, some of what originally appeared to be skimming is just some accidents. But we also have deliberate attacks on systems via underpaid employees, true believers in the election system. It could be partisans. For instance, the Center for Election Integrity from CSU had people in the Cuyahoga Election Board back in the 2000s, and one person in the ballot area with access to the ballot tabulation system said that there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that she would not do to assure that George Bush was reelected. Well, whether you support George Bush or you support somebody else, you don't want anybody having access to the database for election tabulation who has that kind of ethical stance. And so that law student reported it to me. I reported it to the Cuyahoga Board of Elections, and they quietly moved that person. Equipment vendors also are targets and have been, and we've documented that. The particular types of technologies that are targeted, other than the vectors, are the voter registration database systems, the voting systems, voter support information systems that tell voters where to vote, how to track their vote by mail, to file a request for a vote by mail or absentee ballots, et cetera, and also even social media. I assume some of my colleagues on the panel are going to be deepening social media. Further, we have, to make it clearer for elections, poll workers, voting system delivery companies, because these are for the polling places, election technical service vendors, county technical workers, and others. So I'm going to end there with and suggest that, let's see, let me stop screen share. So that's the range of vectors and targets, primary targets. There are many others, but it's a complex system that needs to be managed. And I didn't even focus on the difference between Secretary of State's offices versus counties versus the federal level. I could tell you more about what is finally being done on the federal level, but I'm going to turn things over to my panelists and then we'll wait for questions.
Thank you, Candace. We're going to go next to Kayla Griffin, who is the Ohio Campaign State Director of All Voting is Local. Kayla?
Thank you, Dean Fisher. Thank you, Candace. That was excellent. Definitely schooled me on some things. I'm excited to join you guys and talk about suppression. And our group at All Voting is Local, we really look at the barriers to the ballots. So our work is primarily on how elections officials and Board of Elections are administering the election and the things that prevent people from having access. So voter suppression tends to look different depending on what community you're in. And in the last couple of days, I've had a lot of people asking, you know, I'm not really sure about voter suppression. I'm not sure what that looks like. You know, the technicalities of like the ballot boxes, people aren't, you know, as apt to that. But what they do recognize and what they have seen are these extremely long lines at the polling places. And that's where I want to start. And I will do a brief overview of some of the advocacy work that we've done, where we are, and how we are planning to move forward. And so because we are in a global pandemic, we have seen just issues exacerbated in this election. And one of the things that we were truly advocating for was the expansion of drop boxes here in the state of Ohio. We wanted our Secretary of State to allow counties to have more than one drop box location in order for people to be able to request their ballot, request the absentee ballot, and drop it off at a secure location without having to have extreme travel times or, you know, come all the way down to the middle of Cleveland in order to drop it off. I was out at the Board of Election on Saturday and the lines were about an hour and a half long. Elections Administration officials or commission, they have stated that lines should be no longer than 20 to 30 minutes. And while we heard that the county had a smooth process and by the time you got in, it was seamless, the wait times tend to indicate to us that there is a level of suppression happening. And so a couple weeks ago, I went up to Michigan and I was surprised and shocked that as I drove through in and out of Detroit, there were secure drop boxes on the street, on the corners, right? And the secure drop boxes, at least here in Ohio, we have to have a camera attached so that we make sure that nothing nefarious is happening. But to see so many drop boxes and so many early voting centers throughout the state of Michigan really was a shocker to me. And you guys know, Ohio and Michigan, we're like, what's happening? Like, how is Michigan outdoing us? So I felt some type of way that Michigan has so many early voting locations, drop box locations, and in the state of Ohio, per county, we only have one early voting location and one drop box location per county. This is something that our state legislature, has passed into law and codified. And so these are ways that we as advocates can start to press and say, hey, we want to see something different. We want to see a change. We want to see expansion of early voting and drop box locations. In Ohio, our data team down in DC, they ran some research for us. And we have found that Ohio's top 6 counties, the most populated counties in Ohio, maintain 78% of the Black and Brown voters in the state of Ohio. So that means Franklin, Cuyahoga, Hamilton, Summit, Montgomery, and I'm missing one, it escapes me. 78% of the Black and Brown voters in the state of Ohio reside in those counties. In comparison, when you have a county like Noble County that has roughly 8,000 registered voters, compared to Cuyahoga County that has close to 900,000 registered voters and one drop box location and one early vote site, it really begs the question of if we have access, equitable access across the state of Ohio. Cuyahoga County has 880,000 registered voters, and we are all anticipated and expected to vote early at one site if we want to go and cast our vote in person. So this becomes a problem, and this even more becomes a problem during a global pandemic. If we were not utilizing early vote to the measures that we are, we would probably be going out to vote in person at our electoral polling places. One of the things that we have found is that throughout our county, and I'm sharing my screen, this is some data that we have done, and I want to move this along. So if you are familiar with like redlining and how redlining has affected communities, redlining said that Black and Brown homeowners were limited to a specific area. And oftentimes when we see disparities, we see that any disparity that happens, if you set a red line map on top of it, it pretty much correlates. So here, the red areas are our priority locations. These are the locations that we have had issues with polling places in the past. These are primarily Black and Brown communities. When you start to get out further into our counties, these are the areas that are of lower priority. And so the counties that have the most priority needs are here, right in our east side of Cleveland area. This is what voter suppression looks like, right? And so while we have a lot of little dots here, what data has told us is that from 2012 to 2020, there has been a significant amount of polling locations that have closed in our state. Our state is ranking top in numbers across the country with polling location closures. And what happens is people show up to their old polling location thinking that they can go vote there, not understanding or knowing that polling locations have been consolidated or closed. In addition to the significant issues that we see in polling locations, we also have what we, and I hope that my colleague Elizabeth will talk about the pandemic and how voting in the pandemic serves as a problem. I'm trying to click to the next screen without ending, but we have numbers of how many people are showing up to the polling locations. And here in Cuyahoga County, we have seen that there is so many people attending or showing up to the polling locations in order to vote that really can cause alarm. This is at the 8 to 10 o'clock hour, it's 550 people moving through these locations, right? And so we're still in the midst of a global pandemic. We still have a stay-at-home order. And when you have 2,776 people going through a polling location, and this was just yesterday, so this is on a Monday, that's a lot of people tracking through our county Board of Elections. And that really begs the question of, are we doing all that we can do to flatten the curve, to stop the spread of coronavirus, and to ensure that all voters are taken care of? And so that's the work that we are doing at ABLE. It really is on the local level, looking at the state level, looking at the policies and the procedures that are happening and being implemented. And our work doesn't stop after the election stops. We are still in off season. We are having these conversations and we're advocating, and we hope that you guys will help us in our advocacy efforts. And with that, I will stop and hand it over and be open for questions at the end.
Thanks, Kayla. Let's go next to Elizabeth Bonham, an attorney with the Ohio ACLU.
Thanks, Kayla and Professor Hoke and everyone. It's I have to say it's good to be in a comforting environment of my law school on this, maybe the most depressing morning for federal elections law since Bush versus Gore, given everything that's going on. What I wanted to do was I wanted to provide sort of a digest of the federal court litigation that we're seeing, the issues that are already coming up and that we're concerned may come up going forward, given that we're voting during a pandemic. And there have been at least 400 cases filed in the state and federal courts already. So I can't go over them all, but I'll try and hit some of the circuit court law and hit some of the issues that are going on here in Ohio. Let me just set my timer so that I don't go too long. And I should be clear, as Kayla has already discussed, that the current voter suppression efforts that we're seeing are merely, compounding, exacerbating a long history of baked-in voter suppression that we have to deal with in this country. But really, I think so much more has come up because of the unprecedented numbers of early and by-mail voting during the pandemic. So what's happened already or what's ongoing? Kayla mentioned Dropbox issues. So there has been litigation around Dropboxes, and by and large, we have lost the fight on expanding the use of Dropboxes in states where the elections officials don't want to expand them. The Fifth Circuit upheld a Texas governor's decree limiting Dropboxes for early absentee ballots to 1 per county. And here in Ohio, in APRI versus LaRose, the Sixth Circuit upheld the Ohio Secretary of State's similar limitation, 1 Dropbox per county. In that case, and actually there was a state court ruling, there was a federal court ruling saying, LaRose, you really shouldn't be doing this. The Secretary of State issued a directive mandating this limitation, despite that the bipartisan county boards of elections had planned for and staffed additional Dropbox locations to handle the unprecedented number of ballots. The Sixth Circuit said LaRose gets to do that. This is a 2-1 decision in which the majority noted that the LaRose rule would promote uniformity across the counties in Ohio. Judge White in dissent pointed out that the 850,000 voters in Cuyahoga County, as opposed to the 10,000 voters in Noble, might benefit from some kind of principled nonconformity there. But by and large, as Kayla mentioned, we've lost the Dropbox fight here. There's also been litigation over mask wearing and other really COVID-specific concerns. So far, all the federal courts to remark on this, including the United States Supreme Court, have said generally that COVID-19 is not a reason to, as the Seventh Circuit puts it, displace the decisions of the policymaking branches of government. You can't use COVID-19 as a reason to disrupt voting laws. The Fifth Circuit upheld a Texas executive order that exempted voters from a mask wearing requirement. And as we know, I'm sure most folks know, Ohio, the governor and elections officials will encourage but not require masks inside the polling places. The Supreme Court of the United States blocked curbside voting in Alabama, staying a lower district court order that would have allowed it in spite of that state's election officials' preferred approach. So the courts are also not helping us require safety measures or require measures that would alter voting regulations because of COVID, on the basis of COVID-19. In another category, there has been litigation over the extension of deadlines to receive mail-in ballots, and I'm sure that's on the top of everybody's mind today. The Seventh Circuit held that an Indiana extension of the time for mail-in ballots was invalid as long as people had the chance to vote in person, applying a rational basis standard. And I won't get into how the federal circuit courts are manipulating for the long term the very standards that we use to evaluate voter restrictions, but that's another problem that's going to be longer term coming out of this pandemic. In Pennsylvania, of course, the state Supreme Court there allowed a 3-day extension of the time to receive mail-in ballots. The US Supreme Court did not disturb that state Supreme Court decision. But as everybody saw in this morning's news, the Supreme Court couldn't show that kind of restraint when it was a federal court decision in Wisconsin. Kavanaugh and Gorsuch possibly signaling in their opinions that if state courts fail to rule their way on election day, that could change. There have also been other challenges that I think fall less neatly into categories. You may have read that Michigan voters challenged a state statute prohibiting people from driving voters to the polls. The Sixth Circuit concluded that that was acceptable on a preemption challenge. In signature match litigation out of Tennessee, the Sixth Circuit upheld, I think last week, a complicated scheme requiring double verification of absentee voter signatures. As we all know, signature verification is notoriously unreliable and does not prevent voter fraud, which notoriously doesn't exist. In dissent in that case, Karen Nelson Moore writes, quote, "Make no mistake, today's majority opinion is yet another chapter in the concentrated effort to restrict the vote," citing cases. "I will not be a party to this passive sanctioning of disenfranchisement." So this isn't, this isn't some, somebody off the street. This isn't even an ACLU lawyer. This is one of the smartest people in a 4-state area. So it's bad. Professor Hoke had that sad face emoji. I really feel like I should have sad face emojis all over my screen. I'm not here to deliver any good. I'm not here to deliver any good news either. But I think we should be prepared. I think we should be knowledgeable. I just want to check my time. So we have this going on already because of the pandemic. We also have issues that we're looking towards coming up on election day. I know we're all seeing these numbers come out, early voting, vote by mail. It's great. It's huge numbers, but we're still going to have huge numbers show up at the polls on election day, in part because of the restrictions that we have challenged and failed to prevail on. So, ongoing, there are USPS issues. People are concerned about ballots coming in on time, especially with the reluctance to extend deadlines and the changes to the United States Postal Service. Experts say that in many places today is the last day reliably to send in your ballot. Better to drive it in and drop it off if you're able to do that. In Ohio, of course, we have rules around who is allowed to take your ballot for you. It has to be an immediate family member. Here in Ohio, I should say, ballots have to be postmarked the day before election day. They can be received up to 10 days after. But when you're going to vote, when you're getting your people and telling them to get their people, the thing to do is to take it in if you can. We've already seen issues with vendors. Scene Magazine reported on this last week. Printing vendor that many Ohio counties were using to print their ballots was delayed more than a week. Many of these counties had to revert to printing in-house. And then there are other issues that we've seen before, and they're here again, but they're being compounded by the pandemic. Long lines, too few polling places, understaffing. Particular, again, to the pandemic inside the polling places is how are boards of elections going to deal with someone that does test positive for COVID-19 and still wants to come, somebody that doesn't want to wear a mask, somebody that gets a temperature check and they're high and, you ask them to leave the polls. That's an unknown right now. Can you do curbside voting? How can you accommodate that person? I think it was last week, a couple weeks ago in the news, the Belmont County Board of Elections came out and said, hey, we're begging people in our county to wear masks because every time somebody wants to come in without one, we're evacuating people, sanitizing the room, and it triples the time it takes to vote, and the line is already down the street. And this is in a relatively small county. So I think that's going to be a real concern on election day. And of course, we have, I think in a new way this election, concerns about voter intimidation and concerns about potential violence. There are things that we can do that advocacy organizations can do about that. But I think that really is the biggest concern. What do you do when that happens? How do you be safe and still make sure that there is a reliable election? And then there's what might happen after. People are concerned about a Bush versus Gore scenario. People are concerned about stopping the vote count. and people are concerned, even if the result is clear, about one party accepting a peaceful transfer of power. So I think, this is just a real short summary of the issues we're looking at. I think people are afraid, and I think that's probably right. I'm pretty stressed out, to tell you the truth, most days of the week, even though we're working around the clock to try and make sure this thing goes okay. I think at the end of the day, the majority here has so much to overcome and has to win by such a large margin in order to put the result beyond dispute, for there to be a really safe and secure result on election day. I think otherwise it's probably going to be dragged out, and there are probably going to be issues that we're having to look at. I hope those issues are minor.
You did a good job on staying right when your alarm went off. I was impressed with that. That was your alarm, right, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, all three of you were terrific, and I may be oversimplifying this, but I've identified at least 5 buckets of concern. One, of course, is voter suppression and intimidation. Another is just incompetence on the part of election officials. A third is disinformation. A fourth is criminal activity. And a fifth, which is a very long-term issue, and that is the patchwork quilt of inconsistent laws throughout states and, more importantly, throughout country. I want to focus in for a moment on the issues that I think are most within our control over the next week and beyond, and I mean short term. And those are the issues of voter intimidation and suppression and incompetence. And here's my question. What can be done between now and Election Day, and on Election Day and election night, to deal with the issues of workers who are well-intentioned but make serious mistakes? I put that in the category of incompetence. And the more important issue of voter intimidation, both outside the polls and potentially even inside the polls, in efforts to suppress the vote. Those are the areas I really want to focus on, because the issues of criminal activity and disinformation and a patchwork quilt of laws are issues that are just as important, but they're longer term issues. And right now I want to focus on what can be done literally in the next week and in the days and election day and the days after. So I'm going to start with Professor Hoke and say, give us a master class on what all of us as concerned citizens, regardless of our political ideology, can do to either prevent or minimize or react to both incompetence and, more importantly, voter intimidation and voter suppression between now and Election Day and on Election Day itself.
Well, I'm going to be briefly. Good to see you. I'm going to encourage people to sign up to volunteer for the Election Protection Coalition. And I'm going to ask that one of the other 2 panelists give that information, because we've had law students and those in training for other legal capacity positions exercise some very important protective functions at the polling locations. I think that's going to be critical. Also, Cuyahoga County Board of Elections actually pioneered a model for working with election protection that I have been trying to advocate to other states, and I hope it's still ongoing in Ohio. And that is that the Election Protection Coalition leaders need to meet with each Board of Election director and ask for inside direct liaison information, so that when election protection people notice, for instance, what happened in 2004 of 5 plainclothes suited men walking up to voters and threatening them or challenging their legitimacy to be in line to vote, that what we were able to do was to immediately call the Board of Elections, and they sent people out to disrupt that kind of functioning, or they would talk to the poll workers right there and say, your responsibility is to throw those people out of the location. We've got to be able to disrupt criminal activity. That's what it is criminal activity quickly and efficiently. Now, these people would in teams move to other locations, but I think having that kind of infrastructure in place in advance of the election is very important, and also having those volunteers, particularly from our law school, to election protection. So I'll pass the mic to someone else.
Professor, I just want to add one more thing because I don't want to forget it. I believe the most powerful tool for exposing fraud, intimidation, and suppression today is this thing right here, the phone and its camera. So I think you don't even have to be a poll worker or a poll observer to be able to say, if you go on election day and you see anyone trying to intimidate a voter, you immediately, even before you contact an official, get it on tape.
That's a good
Because that is evidence to expose. And I think all of us need to be empowered to use this in addition to reporting any intimidation to officials. Let's go next to Kayla Griffin.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent point. That was exactly what I was going to say. So our organization sits on the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, and we are still training folks to be election protection volunteers. And so we have people who are election monitors. They are out there on the scene Saturday, Sunday. They're out there every day, but Saturday and Sunday I was out there with them. They're carrying clipboards. They're wearing their EP t-shirts. We are advertising the hotline 1-866-OUR-VOTE. If you are out there and you're voting and you are not a volunteer, please give us a call and let us know what is going on. We have volunteers on the back end receiving those calls. Here in Ohio, we have 49 designated lines to election protection on the 1-866-OUR-VOTE hotline. And so you will be able to get through to someone. Once you get through to someone, there is legal professionals who are the command center captains. So today I'll be a captain, overseeing our volunteers, making sure that any calls that are escalated, we are able to call to the BOEs and resolve those issues. And then if there's something that we see that is systemic, we're putting out calls to our committee, our steering committee. And so we have ambassadors who are on the ground. We have teams of ambassadors that we can call out and say, hey, can you go over to the BOE and check in? Or can you call this person and check in and see what's going on? We also included a last minute training for peacekeepers. And so these are folks who are clergy and or licensed social workers to go out and do de-escalation. So we had to issue some teams out this weekend in Tuscarawas County. There was a rally going on, folks armed, and we sent out our peacekeepers. They were in clergy collars. They were able to, check in, see what was going on, and it was a peaceful resolve. And so there are plenty of ways to get involved. I dropped the link for volunteer efforts there. We also put out a call to our Secretary of State, our BOEs, and then our organization issued a call to the top prosecutors in the county, larger populated counties, to have them take a concerted effort and make a statement against intimidation. And so one of the things that we're training our people to know that, election administrators, the managers of the facilities, they have every right to press charges against people who are committing intimidation. In Ohio, you can also bring civil charges and now sue against people who are committing intimidation. But we want the prosecutors in our counties to take a very affirmative stand and tell the residents of their counties that intimidation will not be tolerated and they will prosecute those. And so one of the things that the legal community can do is put in a call to our prosecutor and say, hey, we are concerned citizens. We know that this could be a potential that happens. This is something that we are certainly planning for. But we want you to take a concerted effort and make a statement to let us know that you will prosecute folks who are out there intimidating voters.
Thank you, Kayla. Elizabeth, your thoughts on what can be done between now and election day and on election day itself?
I think that's what it is. It's, Kayla's group, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. I think this is the exciting, non-depressing part of the meeting. We have people. We have organizers, lawyers. We're sitting in boiler rooms and war rooms and all other kind of military metaphoric language for protecting each other. we've got this. And so I think spread it around, have people volunteer and get the word out. I think one of the problems here is how voter suppression is operating psychologically and culturally for people. They are afraid, and it's designed to make them afraid. They don't think we've got their back. They don't know about it. And so they might feel alone at the polls. And there's an added layer this year. They don't feel like the state has their back. I know lots and lots of people don't already, but I really think that has become exacerbated. People feel like, what is going to happen if I call the police? What is going to happen with the federal government? Is the state really going to remain stable? And is the state really going to protect this election? Or is the state have an interest in interfering with this election? And so, I think people do need to know there are these election protection efforts, and we do have people here and we're ready to go. And like Kayla said, the legal community can get in and volunteer.
Well,
If
I'm
I
glad
could
you
just-
said that. I'm sorry,
I'm
go ahead,
sorry,
Candace.
Nate. The one thing we did not mention is Election Protection Coalition is a nonpartisan entity. It is protecting the votes and the rights to vote of all voters and the system itself. So we want to underscore that. You help the system, you help democracy, and you help individual voters. If we could, Amy, when you send out anything as a result of this, make sure you send out the information on how to sign up for election protection to be a monitor or volunteer. Thank you.
That's good. I like that. Okay, so now let's move to another thought. It's now election night. And the situation is that it's not clear who has won, although some networks are calling it a particular state, but it's still very unclear. And already campaigns are being waged by one or both sides to say that there has been widespread fraud and we should disregard the results of the election because their candidate either is behind or their candidate has been declared the loser. Now what happens? Thoughts, Candace?
Well, mine is going to be from a technology standpoint first, and that is that we have been advocating since 2008 in Ohio that we have nonpartisan forensics teams to go in at the ready on election day to be able to assess any kinds of incursions and the results of those incursions. And so I would advocate that Ohio continue that. It started in 2008. I think there were, I met with the Attorney General after the report was completed, and we actually published a forensics guide for election officials and their attorneys and gave it to the Attorney General. The ABA had sent it out nationwide. We need forensics. We don't want untethered challenges to or arguments about fraud. We want to have proof, and we can get proof. And especially at the technology side, we know how to get that proof. So let's not allow untethered charges of fraud, particularly having to do with technology of any sort. We know how to handle that, but there has to be political will and readiness in advance.
Okay. Kayla and Elizabeth, what happens on scenarios on election night where one or both candidate sides are alleging fraud and they're disputing the results?
Well, I would just briefly say, and I'm going to defer to Elizabeth because ACLU has a whole plan and they got folks in all different rooms, but we already are hearing in Ohio that we can expect to wait a little bit longer. We are not anticipating having the election called on election night. And so our Secretary of State, our BOEs are telling people just kind of settle in, and the conversation is really count every vote. We want to ensure that every vote is counted, and that may take time. And so we really want to allow people, and everywhere that I'm talking to folks, I'm letting them know, just settle in so that we can get every vote counted, and do not anticipate that we will have a count on election night. And so we have to retrain people's minds to really come away from the election night results, but really allow our BOEs to have time to count every vote. And with that, I'll move it to ACLU because they have a whole plan in place.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Without getting into the details of any plan, we're ready. I think voter protection organizations are ready. I think the major parties are going to be in court no matter what. If it's a close call, if it's at all a close call, you know, anything but an utter landslide. And I don't expect it to be an utter landslide. So I think the major parties are going to be litigating this no matter what. And I think the important things are what Professor Hoke and Kayla have already said. First of all, we have evidence-based ways of evaluating this, and we have almost no evidence of what they call voter fraud. If there has been a problem with the election administration, we can figure out what the problem was and everyone can just chill. For that to be effective, we all need our state actors to also just chill. So it's really important, I think, to preserve everybody's safety and to preserve stability, that if it's too close to call, let's litigate it or figure it out with evidence-based methods, take some time, and let's not have the people that are, you know, already in power positions in this state going one way or another. I think it's probably going to be the major parties fighting this out, and I hope that they do it well and ethically.
So it's the ACLU chill strategy. That's what we're going to call it. Okay. Okay. Let's open it up to questions or comments from anybody who's participating today. All you have to do is unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment. And if you don't, I warn you, I keep asking questions. I can't believe you want that. So who wants to ask a question or make a comment? Anyone? Okay. I'm giving it a little bit more time.
I'll ask a question. I'd like to know, since I think that the three of them are such experts on this, it might be more of an opinion, but I'm still going to ask, what do you think are some particular threats related to a dramatic increase in absentee ballots? I mean, they have been increasing every year for the last 20 years that they've been available, but this year could be sort of unprecedented. I think we can all agree. So what are some particular threats you think might be related to absentee ballots in particular?
You want me to respond first?
Anybody can respond.
So one of the problems has to do with the range of techniques that are needed to preserve absentee ballots, the voters' anonymity. So different counties have different approaches, but it's actually quite cumbersome when you think about the need to be able to not only receive the ballot, but also check the signature and assure that the many don't even understand that many to most of our counties in Ohio have signature checking technologies. Did you know that? And they can be calibrated on a sort of sliding scale of how aggressive to be or how unaggressive to be. And so human individuals usually only see it after an envelope has been kicked out. So that's one vulnerability, and it's also can slow, but signature matching is a big problem. Anybody who doesn't match, of course, they're supposed to go into a system so they can be tracked. And so the voter can find out, as well as be notified, that your ballot was rejected, you know, because of a signature mismatch. And then the curing process of that can also delay. But the sheer volume means that many times the counties have not anticipated how many ballots will be coming in this manner and have not staffed for it. Then you've got to remember the pandemic side of normally the staff in the elections offices are working elbow to elbow to open and flip over the ballots once they've been processed. I mean, all of these steps to be able to process and have the space for COVID protection for the employees is actually difficult, because that means more tables, it means more hours, it means more PPE, it means, you know, so you've multiplied in an administrative manner so many factors that any one of which could cause the cogs to fail. And so the system doesn't keep moving, but it's going to take time. And then you've got to have enough high-speed scanners to be able to read all of those ballots. Many times the absentee ballots have been folded in numerous ways that make it a problem to be able to go through a system. Sometimes they have coffee spots on them. I could go on and on, but I think I've said enough for my time. I pass the microphone.
Okay, Kayla and then Elizabeth.
There's nothing to follow up with.
Okay, then here's what I want to do. Because we're right down to our time limit, I want each of you to give a 60-second or less major takeaway that you want everyone to take from today's forum. And we're going to begin with Elizabeth Bonham because I know she has a 1 o'clock hard stop. And then we'll go to Kayla and we'll end with Candace. Okay, Elizabeth, 1 minute takeaway.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated being here with you guys. Get your people and vote, have them get their people and vote. There are so many barriers baked in, and the barriers have all been multiplied this year. I mean, I know everybody that attended this call knows that, but it is worse than you even know it is. So get your people and vote. My mother hasn't voted in an election. She voted in this election. There's one person that you can get to vote that hasn't voted yet, and it's time.
Everyone call Elizabeth's mother just to make sure. Okay, let's go to Kayla next. Okay.
We've been telling everybody make a plan and execute that, but like we're at the deadline. And so you have to know exactly how you're going to go out and vote. Know where your polling location is if you are going to vote in person, but don't stop there. We really need to hold our elected officials accountable after this election. And so there is so much work to be done. There are so many ways for you to advocate, whether that's just picking up the phone and calling. One of the things about being in the legal profession is that we are offered we're offered leeways, and we're able to pick up the phone and say, hey, you know, I graduated from CM Law and somebody is sitting on the committee. Can I talk to their assistant and put in a letter? We really need to see advocacy work in our favor. We want to, and when I say in our favor, I mean in a nonpartisan way. Like elections should be fair and accessible and able for everyone. Free and fair elections for everyone is what we need to see. And so ensure that after this election, don't forget about it. I think that's one of the things that I want you guys to remember, because we'll have another election and another and another. And you know, we've already seen the disparities that is happening. So don't stop advocating after election.
Thank you, Kayla. Candace, final thoughts?
So I'm going to pick up from Kayla and stress the same point. Our democracy will not end, no matter what happens. It will not end in this election cycle. And we have to organize ourselves to make it better. So just exactly what we were saying today about there are flaws in the system that are being exploited of every type. But that doesn't mean that we cannot assess, regroup, and aim for significant improvements and achieve them. And that includes holding the elected officials accountable, no matter who is elected this time. It does not end this 2020 miserable year. So, okay, Lee, back to you.
I'm going to spend the last 2 minutes giving you just 2 quick stories. And they both have the title of numbers. First is 1, 2, 3, 4, and the second is 5, 3, 7. Let me explain. In 1990, I won the closest statewide election in Ohio political history. That record still stands. I won Attorney General by a margin of 1,234 votes out of 3.5 million cast. That's less than 1 vote per precinct. I had the privilege after being elected, then to have a recount, then to have a Supreme Court contest, and you go anywhere in Ohio, look somebody straight in the eye and know there was a good chance that person did not vote for me. But it always made me realize the value of 1 vote. My second story is 537. 537 is the number of votes that George W. Bush won the presidency by, even smaller than my margin. 537 votes in the state of Florida 20 years ago. Watch the documentary on HBO that just came out recently called 537 Votes. Because the truth of the matter is what happened that day, that during that election season 20 years ago could happen again. There are plenty of reasons, and you've heard them all today, to be concerned, to be depressed. But let's focus on the fact that we also can be empowered. We also heard reasons to be optimistic from Elizabeth and Kayla and Candace. And the truth is that we don't have to just rely on others. With the power of a cell phone and the power of a vote, we actually can do something about this. Use that cell phone when you go to vote to spot any voter intimidation. and suppression. And make sure that whatever you do, that you not only vote, but that you encourage others vote, and that you make sure that especially Elizabeth Bonham's mothers vote. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening today. You've all been great. And thank you, because Candace and Kayla and Elizabeth are our warriors on the front line and are done a terrific job. And we can't thank them enough for the work they're doing and continuing to do.
Thank you.
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.